They thought they buried me when they paraded another woman in my place. They thought I'd remain the orphan wife, silent and disposable. But when the Harrington empire burned, I rose from the ashes with my true name, Sophia Tanglin. Now I am chairwoman. The empire that stole my parents is mine to command. And this is only the beginning. The message from Lucas came at 5:02 p.m., as abrupt and lifeless as the man himself had become over the past year. Estate. 7 p.m. formal. Important. No greeting. No signature. Not even punctuation beyond that clipped, functional period. For a long moment I stared at the screen, willing the dots of a follow-up message to appear. They didn't. I set the phone down on the glass console beside my tea and let the silence of the apartment press in on me. The hum of the air conditioner, the tick of the antique wall clock, the faint roar of evening traffic rising from the boulevard 28 floors below. It was all background to the single thought circling in my head. Why tonight? Lucas had been gone for 2 months, supposedly in Singapore overseeing the overseas branch. Overwhelmingly busy, his secretary had said when she remembered to call. Too busy for a video call. Too busy for a text. Too busy to even pretend at the role of husband. And yet tonight suddenly he had summoned me to the Harrington estate. The first time in 4 years of marriage that I'd been invited inside its banquet hall. I drained the last sip of jasmine tea, then crossed into my dressing room. The lights came alive in soft sequence. Dresses slumbered in their bags like well-kept secrets. My hand hovered before sliding down the zipper of one. A champagne silk gown with a clean neckline, subtle flare at the hem, and an air of old Hollywood restraint. A gown that made no noise yet commanded a room. I laid it across the bed, then sat at my vanity. The mirror reflected a woman who had learned, over time, to sculpt armor out of cosmetics. My makeup tonight was minimal but precise. Luminous skin eyeliner drawn in a single confident stroke, lips painted with the shade of calm defiance. My hair I pinned into a simple updo, the kind that looks effortless but takes the patience of a surgeon. When I was finished, I looked like a woman who could stand in a hall of enemies and never flinch. The phone remained silent. I slipped it into my clutch along with lipstick, an ID, and a mint. My fingers hesitated before adding one more thing. A sleek, metallic object no bigger than a paperclip. Cold at first, then warm as if it recognized me. I tucked it inside. Overwhelmingly busy, I murmured and fastened the clasp. The elevator descended through 28 floors of strangers before opening into a lobby of black marble polished into a mirror. Arun, the doorman, straightened with the little bow he reserved only for me. "Miss Reynolds," he said. "Your driver is waiting." "Thank you, Arun." Outside, Naveen had already pulled the sedan to the curb. He opened the door with ceremonial precision. The evening air smelled faintly of rain, that suspended moment before the sky makes its decision. I gathered my dress and slid into the leather seat. "The estate," I said. We moved through the city as twilight deepened. Streetlights flared awake. Glass towers caught the last blush of sun. Pedestrians hurried home or toward dinners where someone would be waiting. I stared out at them and wondered what it must feel like to know someone is waiting. On the expressway a billboard loomed. Victor Tanglin, 10 lessons in building what last. My chest tightened. I looked away. The Harrington estate rose out of its manicured hills like something built to remind the city it owed them reverence. White columns. Iron gates. Lawns trimmed within an inch of their lives. The family liked to call it a heritage property, though everyone knew the Harrington fortune was only 3 generations deep. New money dressed in an old suit. At the gatehouse the guard studied his tablet, then bent into the window to examine me. He lingered just a fraction too long, as if trying to remember the last time he'd seen me here. He waved us through with a deferential nod. The car wound up a long avenue of oaks until the house revealed itself in full. Sprawling wings, lit windows, lanterns glowing in the portico like watchful eyes. Naveen stopped beneath the entrance. A footman stepped forward to open the door, but Naveen beat him to it. Territory marked in gestures. I stepped out, lifting my gown slightly from the damp stones. "Welcome, Ms. Reynolds," Whitby, the estate's manager, said, appearing with a bow. His voice carried that practiced alloy of courtesy and pity reserved for family members who weren't quite family. "Mr. Harrington asked me to be here at 7, I replied. "Of course. You are right on time." Inside, the foyer was a museum of curated power. oil portraits of fabricated ancestors, a boy on a pony whose eyes followed you down the corridor, and an enormous black-and-white photograph of Charles Harrington cutting a ribbon with a smile as rigid as his jawline. The air smelled of lemon oil, roses, and something colder. Money distilled. Voices spilled from the east wing. The banquet wing. The hum of 100 conversations tuned to the same key of expectation. Whitby slowed before the double doors almost imperceptibly. "Would you like to freshen up first, madam?" Translation: Are you sure you want to step in there? "I'm fine." He inclined his head and pressed a hidden panel. The doors began to open. The double doors opened with deliberate grandeur, their polished brass handles gleaming under the chandeliers. Conversation in the banquet hall faltered, like a current interrupted by an unseen rock. Dozens of heads swiveled in unison toward the entrance. I kept my posture steady, my clutch balanced on my lap, though my pulse quickened. This was it, the important moment Lucas had summoned me for. Charles Harrington sat like a carved monument at the head of the imperial table. His gaze, hard and unyielding, swept briefly over me before shifting to the doors. If there was any flicker of discomfort at my presence, he masked it behind decades of practiced stoicism. Margaret Harrington, however, allowed herself the smallest of smirks. Her lips, painted in the shade of ripe plums, curved with quiet satisfaction, as though she already knew the ending of tonight's play and was savoring my ignorance. I inclined my head politely. "Good evening, father. Mother." Charles gave me the barest nod, nothing more than a muscle twitch of acknowledgement. Margaret tilted her head, her eyes scanning the champagne gown I'd chosen, her gaze lingering just long enough to make it clear she was weighing my worth against the moment about to unfold. "Sophia," she murmured. "I didn't expect you." I smiled faintly, even as I heard the undercurrent beneath her words. "I didn't want you here." "Lucas insisted," I replied evenly. "He said tonight was important. He told me I must come." The silence that followed was thin and strained, like a violin string pulled too tight. Margaret's smile stiffened into place, but her eyes betrayed the smallest flash of irritation. Charles lifted his wine glass and set it down again without drinking, the stem making a sharp click against the crystal plate. Then the doors opened wider and Lucas Harrington entered. He carried himself with the confident stride of a man who knew every gaze belonged to him. His tuxedo was perfectly fitted, his dark hair smoothed back, his jaw freshly shaved. But he wasn't alone. In his arms, swaddled in pale blue silk, was a baby. Its tiny face peeked out, ruddy and soft, asleep against Lucas's broad shoulder. At his side, gliding with the serenity of a queen consort, walked Isabel Hart. The breath in my lungs stalled. She wore an ivory suit that clung to her slender figure, every line tailored to emphasize her elegance. Her hair, chestnut brown and glossy, was styled in soft waves that framed her radiant face. A glow clung to her skin, the unmistakable glow of a new mother. Her hands, manicured to perfection, hovered protectively near the infant. I felt the air around me constrict. The whispers began immediately, rippling outward like a pebble striking still water. "Is that Isabel Hart?" "By God, it is. She studied with Lucas in college, didn't she? Weren't they close? And the baby, already this big?" Each word slashed through me, though I sat perfectly composed, my chin lifted, my shoulders squared. Lucas walked toward the head table with the confidence of a man delivering good news, not detonating a bomb. His eyes swept over the hall, pausing only briefly on me. There was no flicker of guilt. No hesitation. Only pride. He stopped before his parents and dipped his head slightly in greeting. "Father. Mother." Margaret reached for Isabel's hand with a warmth I had never received. "Lucas," she said, her voice bright, "what a perfect evening." Then Lucas turned to me. "Sophia," he said lightly, as though we'd simply run into each other in a hallway. "You're here." My lips curved in a small, polite smile. "You said tonight was important. How could I not be?" He held my gaze for a moment, then broke it as if I were an afterthought. Facing the guests, he lifted his voice, strong and assured, carrying easily to every corner of the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you all for coming tonight. Your presence honors us. Tonight, we celebrate a joyous occasion for the Harrington family." The murmurs fell into a hush. Dozens of eyes blinked toward him, then toward Isabel, then back to the baby in his arms. Lucas smiled broadly, pride radiating from him. He adjusted the infant in his hold and continued. Tonight we celebrate the 1-month birthday of my son. The words dropped like stones into water. Gasps rippled through the hall. Glasses stilled halfway to lips. Chairs creaked as guests leaned forward, as though hearing couldn't be trusted without seeing too. The shock was not subtle. It was thunderous. Everyone in this room knew Lucas and I had been married for 4 years. Everyone knew we had no children. Everyone knew Isabel Hart was his former flame from university. The one woman he had never quite released, though he married me. Now here she stood at his side, radiant with the triumph of new motherhood, while I sat at the head table, invisible, irrelevant. Lucas turned, his arm slipping around Isabel's waist as though claiming her as firmly as the child in his arms. His smile softened, his eyes tender. "And this," he declared, "is Isabel Hart. The mother of my child." The applause came, awkward, scattered at first, then swelling into a polite wave, though beneath it hummed the electric crackle of scandal. Guests exchanged glances, mouths covered by champagne flutes, eyes darting between me and the glittering tableau before them. I sat perfectly still, my fingers tightening around the stem of my glass until I feared it might shatter. Inside my heart cracked, each beat sharp and jagged. But my face remained calm, a porcelain mask refusing to break. Lucas looked out over the hall with the satisfaction of a man unveiling his greatest achievement. Isabel lowered her lashes demurely, though the corners of her lips betrayed the tiniest curve of triumph. And the baby, Lucas's joyous occasion, whimpered softly in his arms before settling once more into sleep. The chandeliers glowed brighter, as though to spotlight this new family at the center of it all. I could feel every eye flickering toward me, waiting for my reaction. Waiting for the wife to crumble, to storm, to rage. But I gave them nothing. I simply sat there, champagne silk shimmering beneath the lights, my smile as fragile as glass, and let the silence of my dignity speak louder than their applause. And in that silence, the realization struck with brutal clarity. This had been arranged, planned, proved, celebrated by everyone but me. I had been the only one in the dark. The applause still echoed faintly, a brittle sound that did not match the scandal that had just been unveiled. When it faded, the silence that followed was heavier than stone. I sat frozen, my back straight, my hands hidden neatly in my lap. Outwardly composed. Inwardly, my stomach twisted until I thought I might choke on air. At the head of the table, Margaret Harrington rose first, her sapphire brooch flashing as she leaned forward. Her smile was warm, almost indulgent, directed not at me but at Isabel. "Isn't she radiant?" Margaret cooed, reaching for Isabel's free hand. "And the child, what a gift! What a blessing to the Harrington family." Isabel lowered her lashes, feigning modesty, though the corners of her lips trembled with barely concealed triumph. She shifted closer to Lucas, her ivory suit brushing his sleeve. Charles finally spoke, his voice deep and deliberate. "Lucas has done his duty. The Harrington family must have its next generation. This is what matters." My chest constricted. His words weren't meant for me, they were spoken past me, through me, as though I were air between bodies. I looked at them both, searching for even a flicker of shame. There was none. Only satisfaction. Then Margaret's gaze snapped to me. Her smile stiffened, her tone dipped lower, silk stretched over iron. "Sophia," she said sweetly. "You needn't feel threatened. Isabel is a good girl. She won't take your place. From now on, you'll be like sisters, taking care of Lucas and the child together." A low ripple of laughter coursed through the hall. Not cruelly loud, but sharp enough to sting like little cuts across the skin. My throat tightened. I forced myself to lift my champagne flute, though my hand shook faintly against the glass stem. Guests leaned toward one another, their whispers carrying just far enough. "She's the legal wife, isn't she? 4 years and no children, and now this. Imagine being asked to raise another woman's baby. Tragic but almost funny, isn't it?" The orchestra, as if oblivious, struck up a tune so cheerful it bordered on mockery. I turned my gaze to Lucas. "Is this truly what you want?" My voice was soft, but it sliced through the table's chatter. For the first time that night, irritation cracked his polished mask. His brows furrowed, and he exhaled sharply as though I had inconvenienced him. "Sophia," he said, voice pitched with warning. Don't be unreasonable. Isabel gave birth to my son. I have a responsibility, to her and to the child. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd, as though he were a man of rare virtue rather than a husband parading his mistress in front of his wife. Isabel leaned her head delicately against his shoulder, the picture of fragile contentment. She turned her luminous gaze to me. Don't worry, sis, she murmured, her voice dripping with faux sincerity. The baby will respect you. We'll all live together as one family. My heart thundered, but outwardly I laughed. Not loudly, but with a hollow sound that rang strange in the grand hall. A sound that made the closest guests shift uncomfortably in their seats. Lucas's eyes narrowed, a warning. Sophia, don't make a scene. Everyone is watching. As if I needed reminding. Every gaze in the hall had already skewered me, dissecting my silence, savoring my pain. I sat, trapped in the glow of chandeliers, trapped in the Harrington name I had worn for 4 years, and understood with piercing clarity. This was never sudden. This had been planned, arranged, orchestrated, by Lucas, by his parents, by Isabel, and I had been the only one left in the dark. The applause, the whispers, the careful approval of my in-laws, none of it was spontaneous. It was a stage. And I was the fool who had been summoned to play her part without a script. The orchestra played on, violins drawing a falsely cheerful tune over the brittle silence that had settled at the head table. Glasses clinked here and there, but they were nervous sounds, not celebratory ones. I sat perfectly still, a porcelain statue in champagne silk, my lips curved in a faint, inscrutable smile. Around me, guests whispered and tittered, some trying to hide it behind raised hands, others bold enough to let their curiosity spill across the tablecloth. Lucas had expected me to break, to crumble under the weight of public humiliation. He had orchestrated this reveal with all the precision of a corporate presentation, convinced he held every advantage. But what he didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that I had been waiting for this. The final, unforgivable blow that would free me from all hesitation. I lifted my gaze, meeting Lucas's eyes across the width of the table. His arm was still looped around Isabel's waist, his hand possessive, protective. She leaned into him, radiant in her triumph, her lashes lowered like a bashful bride. Is this truly what you want, Lucas? I asked softly. A hush fell. The nearby guests tilted their heads to catch every word. Lucas's expression soured. Sophia, he said, irritation coating my name. Don't be dramatic. Isabel gave me a son. That child is my blood. I have a responsibility. Responsibility, I echoed, my voice low, steady. I leaned forward slightly, the light from the chandeliers striking the planes of my face. Interesting word. Do you know why we never had children, Lucas? A ripple of curiosity spread through the hall. Guests shifted in their seats. Margaret stiffened, Charles's jaw twitched. Lucas frowned. Don't start. But I did. Because I made sure of it. I said clearly, each word like a drop of acid. From the very first night of our marriage I prevented it. Every time without fail. I never intended to give you a child. Gasps erupted like a wave crashing against rock. Forks clattered against china. Someone at the back choked on their drink. Lucas's face blanched, then flushed a dangerous red. You what? I didn't flinch. Did you think I would tether myself forever to you? Did you think I would give the Harrington family the leverage of my body when I already knew where your loyalties lay? Isabel's hand tightened around the baby's blanket. Her lips parted in a gasp that sounded almost rehearsed. Sophia, you misunderstood us. I cut her off with a raised hand, my eyes never leaving Lucas. 2 years ago. When you insisted she travel abroad with you to develop new markets. My voice dripped with contempt. Do you remember, Lucas? Because I do. That was when I stopped even pretending to hope for fidelity. The whispers sharpened into a buzz. So it's true. All along. He brought her overseas? Lucas slammed his glass onto the table, the wine sloshing violently. Enough. Enough. I tilted my head. You've paraded your mistress and bastard child before me, before your family, before the entire city, and you tell me enough? His eyes burned with rage. Watch your mouth. Margaret leaned in, her voice low and warning. Sophia, this is unbecoming. Sit quietly, don't embarrass yourself further. I laughed, sharp and cold. Embarrass myself? I am not the one flaunting adultery as celebration. Lucas shot to his feet, his chair scraping harshly against the marble floor. He raised his hand, whether to silence me or to strike me I didn't care. The entire hall froze, breathless. I didn't flinch. If you touch me, I said, my voice cutting like a blade, the Harrington Empire will collapse before your hand falls. His arms stiffened midair, trembling with fury. What nonsense are you spewing? I reached calmly for my clutch, unfastening the clasp. My fingers closed around the sleek metallic device hidden within. The hall seemed to lean in, hungry. Do you know why your family took me in, Lucas? I asked, rising slowly to my feet. My gown shimmered, catching every eye. Do you remember what your parents told you? Charles's brows knitted. Your parents died. You were alone. We showed compassion. Compassion, I repeated, savoring the word. I shook my head, smiling faintly. No. 10 years ago the Harrington family received $50 million. A transfer from an anonymous benefactor. On one condition, that I marry into your family. A stunned silence fell, deep and absolute. Margaret's face drained of color. How do you know that? I held up the device in my hand, a phone, its screen already glowing. Because the money came from my uncle. Because he never trusted the Harringtons. And because he has been waiting for this moment just as I have. The audience erupted, gasps, murmurs, shocked laughter. That's impossible. She was an orphan. What is she saying? Lucas staggered, his face pale with disbelief. You're lying. I dialed with a single tap, pressed speaker and lifted the phone. A calm, authoritative voice answered instantly. It's time, I said. Understood, President Tang, the voice replied. Gasps rolled through the hall like thunder. The words spread, murmured from table to table. Tang, Tang, Tang. I slipped the phone back into my clutch and looked at Lucas, at Margaret, at Charles. All of them paling, all of them realizing too late. You wanted to humiliate me tonight, I said, my voice steady, resonant in the vaulted hall. But you've only handed me the perfect stage. Ladies and gentlemen, I turned slightly, addressing the rows of gaping faces. Allow me to introduce myself properly. I am Sophia Reynolds, heir to the Tanglin Group. The woman you dismissed as an orphan is, in fact, the one who controls the lifeline of the Harrington Empire. The chandeliers glittered above, their crystals trembling as if echoing the collective shock below. Lucas's hand dropped uselessly to his side. His lips moved but no sound came out. Isabel's face had gone ghostly pale, the baby in her arms fussing restlessly. Margaret pressed her fingers to her brooch as though it could steady her pounding heart. Charles's expression cracked for the first time in years, his mask of stoicism shattering into horror. And I stood there, the center of their collapsing universe, smiling with the serenity of someone who had waited a decade for this exact moment. The whispers had turned into a roar now, guests rising from their seats to gawk, to murmur, to record the unfolding downfall of the mighty Harrington family. But I only lifted my glass, calm, steady, victorious. To the Harringtons, I said softly, though the microphone carried it through the hall. May you remember this night for the rest of your lives. For a long moment the banquet hall was utterly still. No clinking of glasses. No murmurs. No laughter. Just the stunned silence of 66 tables holding their breath, watching an empire begin to crack in real time. I stood at the head table, my champagne gown shimmering beneath the chandeliers, the phone still warm in my hand. The echo of that single word, President Tang, still reverberated through the gilded air like a bell struck at midnight. At last Lucas found his voice, though it came out raw and hoarse. You're lying. I slipped the phone into my clutch, smoothing the silk across my hips with deliberate calm. Am I? Margaret's painted lips quivered. Sophia, this is madness. You can't expect us to believe. I cut her off with a quiet laugh. Believe what you wish. But you cannot change the truth. I let my gaze sweep across the hall, landing briefly on every pair of hungry eyes. They leaned forward, captivated, savoring every word of my revelation like spectators at an execution. You all thought me an orphan, I began, my voice steady, carrying to every corner of the hall. A girl left with nothing after a tragic car accident 10 years ago. That's the story the Harringtons allowed to spread. But it was never the truth. The guests erupted in murmurs, some gasping, others leaning closer to whisper furiously into their neighbors' ears. My parents did die that night, I continued, my throat tightening briefly before I forced the words into steel. But their deaths were no accident. They were the heads of the Tanglin Group, a family empire older and stronger than most of you in this room could imagine. They were targeted, eliminated, because their power threatened too many others. And when the wreckage was cleared, the world was told their only daughter had died as well. I paused, watching their faces pale, watching their hunger sharpen. But I did not die. My uncle Victor Tanglin whisked me away. For 10 years he kept my identity hidden, waiting, watching. He told the world I was gone, and in that lie I found protection. Gasps rippled again. Across the table, Margaret's hand tightened around her brooch until her knuckles whitened. Charles shifted in his chair, his stoic mask cracking into a deep frown. And when I came of age, I went on, my uncle saw an opportunity. He offered the Harrington family $50 million, on one condition, that they take me in, that they marry me to their only son. Not out of charity as you so often claimed. I turned my eyes on Charles, then Margaret. Out of greed. The words landed like blows. Charles's face flushed. That. You denied it? I asked smoothly. Would you like me to show the documents? The transfer orders? The offshore accounts tied directly to your family trust. The patriarch fell silent. The guests stirred wildly now, the whispers turning frantic. 50 million. They bought her. No wonder she always seemed out of place. By God, it's true. Lucas stumbled forward, his face twisted with disbelief. No, this is impossible. Impossible. I raised an eyebrow. Or simply inconvenient? I let the silence stretch, then reached into my clutch again. This time I drew out a slim leather folder, embossed with the Tanglin crest. This, I said, placing it on the white tablecloth, is the latest report on the equity and asset structure of Harrington Enterprises. While you were too busy chasing mistresses and basking in borrowed wealth, Lucas, I was working. I opened the folder, sliding a page free. The black and white text gleamed under the chandeliers, columns of figures sharp as knives. Over the past 4 years, I declared, I've acquired 51% of Harrington Enterprises, through offshore companies, shell corporations and silent buyouts. Piece by piece, share by share, until tonight when I hold majority control. The room gasped in unison. Charles shot to his feet, his chair toppling backward with a crash that echoed through the hall. What nonsense. Sit down, Charles, I said coldly. The numbers are irrefutable. I own you now. Every decision, every contract, every asset, flows through me. Margaret's face had drained of all color, her lips moving soundlessly like a woman praying to a god who would not listen. Lucas shook his head violently. No, this is lies. Fabrications. You couldn't possibly. But I wasn't finished. I slipped a second sheet from the folder, holding it high so the nearest guests could see the seals at the bottom. As of this morning, by order of the court, every Harrington account has been frozen. Every property placed under review. Even the red envelopes prepared for tonight's little celebration have been seized. Chaos erupted. Guests leapt to their feet, craning their necks. Some covered their mouths in shock. Others murmured excitedly, hungry for the scandal. A woman shrieked faintly while a man's booming laugh cut across the hall, half in disbelief, half in savage delight. Margaret collapsed back into her chair, clutching her brooch as though it could anchor her drowning body. Charles's hands shook where they gripped the table. Lucas staggered backward, nearly dropping the baby Isabel thrust into his arms. And Isabel, beautiful, triumphant Isabel, finally lost her composure. Her eyes went wide with horror, her lips parting in a silent scream. No, she whispered, her voice trembling. This can't be. The baby began to cry, its wails slicing through the cacophony. Isabel tried to hush it, but her hands shook so violently the child squirmed harder. I closed the folder with a decisive snap. Ladies and gentlemen, I said calmly, my voice carrying even over the chaos, this evening was meant to be my humiliation. But instead, it has become the Harringtons' reckoning. I stand before you not as Sophia Reynolds, the orphan wife. I stand as Sophia Tanglin, sole heir to the Tanglin Group. And as of tonight, I hold in my hands the fate of the Harrington family. The chandeliers glittered above, the orchestra faltered into silence, and 66 tables erupted into a frenzy of whispers. Recording devices raised like weapons. The Harrington empire was crumbling, before their guests, before the city, before the world. And I at last stood unveiled. The banquet hall behind me had dissolved into chaos, but I didn't look back. My heels clicked softly against the marble corridor, each step carrying me farther from the Harringtons' world and deeper into my own. For 4 years I had entered rooms as Lucas Harrington's silent wife, the orphan girl polished into a decorative accessory. Tonight I left as Sophia Tanglin, the rightful heir, the woman who had waited a decade to reclaim her name. Whitby, the estate manager, had bowed as he opened the doors. Naveen, my driver, had the car waiting with quiet precision. Even the guards who had once treated me with faint condescension now snapped to attention. Titles change and loyalty follows gravity. The night air was sharp with rain, the kind of air that feels like absolution. I inhaled deeply, letting the cold settle in my lungs, then stepped into the car. To Tanglin Tower, I said. As we drove away, the faint music of the orchestra followed for a moment, then faded, drowned by the roar of thunder. By the time I returned to my apartment, the first shockwaves had already begun. My phone lit with messages. Reporters, acquaintances, even distant relatives who had once ignored me, now eager to bask in reflected light. Headlines were multiplying like wildfire across the internet. Cinderella was a Tanglin heiress all along. The orphan bride who toppled the Harrington dynasty. From forgotten wife to corporate queen, Sophia Tanglin's night of reckoning. I skimmed the words without emotion. Public opinion shifts with the wind. What mattered was not their approval but the reality. The Harrington empire was finished. It was close to midnight when the doorbell rang. On the surveillance screen, Lucas stood outside. His tuxedo was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes wild with desperation. Rain poured around him, streaking down his face until it was impossible to tell if the shine on his cheeks was water or tears. I tightened the silk belt of my robe and opened the door just enough to look at him. "Sophia," he gasped, his voice hoarse. "Please. Let me in." I leaned against the doorframe, calm. "Why?" His hand pressed against the frame as if holding himself upright. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Isabel, she means nothing. I'll leave her, I swear. Just you and me. We can start over." I tilted my head, studying him as though he were a stranger. "You'll leave her?" "Yes," he said quickly. "I'll tell her tomorrow. I'll tell everyone. Just don't destroy us." The laugh that escaped me was bitter, sharp. "You think this is about Isabel? You think your betrayal can be erased with a promise?" He flinched at the contempt in my tone. "Sophia, please. For the sake of what we had." "What we had," I interrupted coldly, "was buried the moment you brought your mistress and bastard child into my face, into that hall, expecting me to smile. You don't understand, Lucas. By morning there will be nothing left to save. Your empire, your reputation, your name, they're already gone." His eyes widened, panic flashing like lightning. "No, you can't. You wouldn't." "I already have," I said and closed the door. His fist pounded once, twice against the wood. Then silence. Rain poured around him, a man drowning not in water but in the collapse of everything he had built on lies. He stayed there for a long moment, shoulders heaving, before finally stumbling back into the storm, swallowed by the night. I did not watch him leave. I turned, locked the door, and let the silence of my apartment wrap around me like armor. By dawn the world had changed. My phone buzzed relentlessly with updates, but I had expected this. The statement from Tanglin Group had gone out on schedule. A calm confirmation of my identity, the announcement of my new role as majority shareholder of Harrington Enterprises, and a reassurance to the market that the transition would be handled with dignity and order. The press, of course, turned it into fire. Cinderella no more. Sophia Tanglin reveals herself as heiress at Harrington Gala. The hidden queen who crushed her husband's dynasty. From orphan to overlord. The fall of the Harringtons. News anchors replayed clips from the banquet hall that guests had leaked. My calm announcement, Lucas's pale shock, Margaret's trembling hand over her brooch. The images played on loop, dissected frame by frame like war footage. On social media, hashtags trended worldwide. Hashtag Sophia Tanglin. Hashtag Fall of the Harringtons. #Cinderella. Where once I had been invisible, now I was everywhere. But it wasn't only me. The Harringtons were dragged into the light as well. Every past arrogance, every whispered scandal, every questionable deal, resurfaced like corpses floating up from the bottom of a dark lake. And Isabel Hart. At first, some outlets painted her as the tragic other woman. Seduced, perhaps manipulated, a victim of Lucas's weakness. But the story shifted as quickly as the tide once my team began to release carefully prepared documents. Her sordid past unfolded in the headlines. In college, she had dated 3 men at once, playing them off for gifts and access. After graduation, she had climbed her way through a series of wealthy men, each relationship ending the moment their fortunes waned. Most damning, she had been simultaneously involved with Lucas and a married executive overseas. The tabloids feasted. Photos, text messages, financial records, all neatly discovered by investigative reporters who didn't need to know how the trail had been laid. By midday, Isabel's sponsors had begun severing ties. Fashion houses pulled her from campaigns, wellness brands deleted her photos from their feeds, charity boards stripped her name from their rosters. And the cruelest blow of all, the internet turned her into a meme. Screenshots of her standing beside Lucas, cradling the child like a prize, were captioned with lines like, "Queen for a night, fraud for life." From white silk to stained reputation. Her ivory suit, the one she had chosen to outshine me, became a symbol of her fall. Every stain of humiliation, every whisper of scandal, clung to it in the public imagination. Meanwhile, Harrington Enterprises crumbled. By the time the markets opened, their stock had already plummeted. Investors fled in droves, unwilling to touch a company mired in scandal. Creditors began calling in loans. Partners announced suspensions of contracts. The empire Lucas had believed untouchable was reduced to ashes in less than 24 hours. Reporters swarmed outside their estate, capturing images of Margaret and Charles leaving in silence, their faces gray and hollow. Rumors swirled of Charles's failing health, of Margaret's breakdown. And Lucas? The once proud heir was nowhere to be seen. Some claimed he had gone into hiding. Others swore they had seen him staggering drunk through the streets. The truth didn't matter. The narrative had already written him out. That evening I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Tanglin Tower, watching the city blaze with light. The storm had passed, the sky scrubbed clean. My reflection looked back at me, poised, steady, no longer the wife who had swallowed humiliation in silence. For the first time in years I breathed without weight on my chest. The Harringtons had tried to strip me of dignity, to reduce me to a footnote in their legacy. Instead, they had given me the stage upon which I reclaimed my own. And as for Isabel Hart, the woman who had once been his first love, she would spend the rest of her life remembered not as a sainted mother, but as the fraud who destroyed herself chasing another woman's throne. I raised a glass of wine to the night. To endings, I whispered. Because only when something ends can the true beginning finally unfold. The Harringtons' fall in society was swift. But power isn't undone by scandal alone. It must be buried in evidence, paper trails, signatures, and confessions that no amount of wealth can erase. That was the work I turned to after the banquet. The documents came to me in layers, peeled back like the skin of an onion, each revealing something fouler beneath. Some were slipped anonymously under Tanglin Tower's doors, leaks from frightened Harrington employees suddenly loyal to survival rather than legacy. Others I obtained through quiet court orders, subpoenas filed under the veil of Tanglin's corporate investigations. At the heart of it all was one file, a wire transfer record dated 10 years ago. $20 million wired from a Harrington-controlled shell company to an offshore account linked to a known mercenary. The date, exactly 1 week before my parents' fatal car crash. When I saw it, my chest tightened so violently I had to grip the edge of the desk. All these years, whispers had haunted me. Accident, sabotage, business rivals. But here at last was proof. My parents' deaths had not been fate. They had been engineered. And the hands that signed the order were Harrington hands. I stared at the paper until my vision blurred, then forced myself to steady. Justice had waited a decade. It would wait no longer. The raid on the Harrington estate came at dawn 3 weeks later. Dozens of officers in dark jackets swarmed the mansion's gates, cameras trailing close behind. The world had been primed for the spectacle, and the media was more than eager to record the end of a dynasty. Charles Harrington, still insisting on dignity, walked out flanked by police, his hands bound in steel. Reporters shouted questions. He ignored them, but the pallor in his face betrayed him. Margaret clutched his arm until an officer peeled her away. "This is illegal," she shrieked. "We are Harringtons. You cannot do this." But they could. I watched from Tanglin Tower, the feed playing across 3 different networks. My pulse didn't race. I felt no glee. Only the cold, clean satisfaction of truth being dragged into daylight. Charles didn't last long in custody. The pressure of interrogation, the weight of exposure, the collapse of everything he had schemed for. It broke something inside him. One afternoon, as officers escorted him between hearings, he clutched his chest and crumpled. By the time doctors stabilized him, the damage was done. He had suffered a cerebral hemorrhage, leaving half his body paralyzed, his speech reduced to broken syllables. Justice had been delivered, but cruelly, it had left him alive, trapped in his own ruined body. Lucas fared no better. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Forged contracts, embezzled funds, offshore tax evasions. The courtroom was packed every day of his trial, journalists scribbling furiously as the prosecutors laid out transaction after transaction, each number another nail in his coffin. I sat through only one session. When the prosecutor projected Lucas's signature across the courtroom screen, dozens of them damning in their uniform arrogance, I turned away. The verdict came swiftly: guilty on multiple counts of corporate fraud, embezzlement and securities manipulation. The sentence, 15 years. The cameras caught him as the judge read the words. His once proud shoulders sagged. His eyes searched the crowd, perhaps for me. But I was not there to witness his final fall. He had lost that privilege. Isabel Hart's defense was pitiful. He wept, of course. She painted herself as a victim manipulated by Lucas, pressured into falsifying documents, forced into lies she never wanted. But the evidence shredded her story. Falsified identities on property deeds, forged expense claims, shell accounts opened in her name. Her glamorous facade crumbled under fluorescent courtroom lights. The judge, unimpressed by tears, delivered her sentence: 3 years for fraud and identity falsification. Once the darling of society, Isabel Hart left the courthouse in handcuffs, photographers capturing every miserable step. The ivory glow she had once worn was gone, replaced by the gray of disgrace. Margaret Harrington was the last to fall, but her collapse was the most dramatic. Denied her wealth, shunned by society, her mind turned against her. Neighbors whispered that she spoke to shadows at night, crying that her husband's sins had summoned ghosts. Servants reported her waking screaming, convinced she saw my mother's face in every mirror. One evening she was found wandering barefoot through the gardens, murmuring apologies to people long dead. She was admitted to a psychiatric facility soon after, her once calculating eyes now glazed with fear. For a woman who had prided herself on control, it was the cruelest end. A mind devoured by paranoia, haunted by guilt she could no longer conceal. When it was over, when Charles was confined to a wheelchair, Lucas sent to prison, Isabel disgraced and Margaret locked away, I visited my parents' grave. I laid 2 bouquets of white roses on the stone and traced their names with my fingertips. "Justice has been done," I whispered. At last. The wind stirred through the trees, rustling the leaves as though answering me. I stood a long while, not as the orphan who had once been powerless, but as the woman who had taken back everything stolen from her. And as I left the cemetery I felt it clearly: this chapter was closed. A month passed, but the ripples of the Harrington downfall were still felt across the city. Their marble estate was silent now, shutters drawn, gardens overgrown without the battalion of staff that once pruned them to geometric perfection. The name that had once struck awe in business circles had become shorthand for fraud, arrogance, and collapse. Meanwhile, Tanglin Group soared. Investors who had abandoned Harrington Enterprises pivoted eagerly to me. The woman they had once dismissed as an orphan wife was now Chairwoman Tanglin in all but title, and the markets responded with reverence. But first there remained one final task: the liquidation of Harrington Enterprises. The conference room smelled faintly of ink and tension. Papers spread across the long oak table, a battlefield reduced to columns and figures. My legal team sat in crisp rows, their faces neutral but eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of victory. "This document," Minji, my legal director, said, sliding a thick contract toward me, "finalizes the liquidation. Harrington Enterprises as an entity will cease to exist. Its prime assets, real estate, patents, logistics networks, are now absorbed into Tanglin Group." I picked up the fountain pen, its gold nib catching the light. For a heartbeat I hesitated, not out of doubt but to savor the moment. 4 years of humiliation, 10 years of silence, and tonight it came down to this stroke of ink. I signed. "Effective immediately," Minji confirmed, collecting the document. "Tanglin Group is the sole heir to everything the Harringtons built and lost." Silence followed, not the awkward kind but reverent. My staff knew. They understood that this was more than paperwork. It was closure. I leaned back, exhaling. So ends the Harrington dynasty. The Tanglin boardroom at the top of our tower was a cathedral of glass and steel. From its windows, the city stretched endlessly, gleaming in late afternoon light. The directors filed in, each one bowing slightly as they took their places. Some had served under my father, others had joined during my uncle's stewardship. All had witnessed the Tanglin name weather storms, and now rise brighter. Victor Tanglin, my uncle, entered last. His silver hair was combed neatly, his steps measured but steady. Though age had lined his face, his presence was undiminished. When he sat at the head of the table, silence fell. He looked around slowly, his eyes lingering on each director before resting on me. 10 years ago, he began, voice deep and deliberate, "I lost a brother and sister-in-law to treachery. That night I also inherited a child to protect. I hid her, shielded her, waited until she was strong enough to carry what was rightfully hers." A murmur rippled around the table. Victor stood. "I have served as chairman long enough. Today I step down." Gasps. Heads turned. The directors exchanged startled glances. He extended his hand toward me. "I now present to you your true leader. The rightful heir of Tanglin. My niece, Sophia Tanglin." I rose, my champagne-colored suit catching the glow of the chandeliers. For a moment I stood beside my uncle, the man who had raised me from ruin, who had played steward until the heir was ready. I felt the weight of legacy settle onto my shoulders, not as a burden but as armor. "Chairwoman Tanglin," Victor said formally, placing my hand over the gavel at the head of the table. Applause thundered through the boardroom. The directors rose in unison, bowing slightly, voices echoing. "Chairwoman Tanglin." The words rang in my ears, sealing the transformation. No longer the orphan. No longer the discarded wife. I was the phoenix risen, cloaked in flame and power. When the applause faded, I raised a hand. Silence returned instantly. "My father built Tanglin Group on steel and discipline," I began. "My mother expanded it with grace and vision. Their lives were stolen, their legacy nearly extinguished. But I stand here because we refuse to let treachery decide our future." Faces around the table were intent, some with awe, others with admiration. Today I announce the next step in our expansion. Tanglin Group will enter the new energy sector. A ripple went through the directors. Some leaned forward, others whispered. I continued firmly. This was my father's dream project. He believed new energy would not only shape markets but secure the future of this country. He never lived to see it realized. But I will. I placed a folder on the table, plans, patents, partnerships already in place. We will invest, build, and lead. Within 5 years, Tanglin will not only be a titan of industry, but the heartbeat of innovation. The directors burst into applause again, this time louder, more fervent. Some even stood. Victor watched me from his seat, pride glowing in his eyes. When the noise subsided, he said simply, "Your father would be proud." My throat tightened, but I smiled. "Then I will make sure the world remembers his name through mine." That evening, when the boardroom emptied and congratulations faded, I went alone to the cemetery. The air was cool, the sky brushed with stars. The path to my parents' grave was lined with tall cypress trees, their shadows long in the moonlight. I carried 2 bouquets of white roses, fresh and fragrant. Kneeling, I laid them gently on the stone. The names etched there glowed faintly in the pale light. I traced the letters with trembling fingers. "Mother. Father." "It's over," I whispered. "The Harringtons have paid. Their empire is gone, their sins exposed. Justice has been done. The wind rustled through the trees as if answering. I closed my eyes. Memories rose. The sound of my father's laughter, the warmth of my mother's hands. For years those memories had been poisoned by grief and unanswered questions. Tonight they felt clean again. I am chairwoman now, I said softly. Tanglin Group is mine to guide. And I will guide it where you dreamed. Into the new energy sector, into a future you sacrificed everything for. Tears pricked my eyes, but they were not bitter. They were resolute. I vow to rebuild our legacy, I whispered, voice firm. I vow to ensure the Tanglin name shines brighter than ever. Your dream will not die. It will blaze. The wind stilled, the night quiet but alive. For the first time in 10 years I felt peace. I rose, brushing the grass from my knees, and looked once more at their names. Rest, mother. Rest, father. Your daughter has risen. Then I turned, the night sky wide above me, the future open before me. The book. 1 month ago I had been an ornament at a banquet, discarded for another woman's triumph. Tonight I stood reborn, an empire at my back and the world at my feet. Like the phoenix I had burned, humiliated, betrayed, broken. But from the ashes I had risen. And my fire was only beginning. The end.